South Africa is due to hold peace talks, or at least host peace talks, between representatives of the warring sides in Ethiopia. It's in a bid to end 2 years of fighting in the Tigray region, which erupted in 2020. Thousands of people have reportedly been killed, while millions have been displaced by the conflict. Human Rights Watch has been highlighting its concerns about the welfare of civilians in Tigray. Let's speak about this with Laetitia, senior Ethiopia researcher with Human Rights Watch, speaking to us from Rome in Italy. A very good afternoon to you, ma'am. I'm grateful for your time. So the conversations, we're not hearing much about when exactly these two parties will sit together at the table and sort of try to find, shall we say, an agreement on peace. But what are your expectations?
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, in theory, the talks are expected to start this afternoon, but there is very, very little information on what is happening, what is going to be discussed. I mean, the talks are happening following 2 months of resumed very, very heavy fighting. Now, this is a region, the Tigray region, which continues to be cut off from the world. There's not been any internet for 2 years. The banking system is down. There's no electricity. There's no telephone communication. So it is still incredibly hard to get real-time information. But what we have managed to gather in the last few weeks is that the Ethiopian federal government offensive with Eritrean government forces has involved heavy shelling, including the use of drones in urban areas, which have resulted in civilian casualties. We know that countless civilians have once again been displaced. Now, these are communities, many of which have already been displaced as a result of abuses in early phases of the conflict. So these are really a civilian population which has been suffering for over 2 years now. We also know that Tigrayan forces moved into the Amhara region to certain towns there, and we were receiving reports of looting and extrajudicial executions by Tigrayan forces against the Amhara civilian population there. So this is really a conflict which for over 2 years has resulted in massive abuses against civilians.
And at the heart of the fighting between the federal government in Addis Ababa as well as the TPLF, at the moment it has to do, does it not, with territory. And you have to wonder, though, if there aren't any agreements on allowing or a split of the territory, or even allowing the TPLF to keep all the land at once, if there's any point to these discussions, any prospect of success.
I mean, there are a host of very contentious issues, including discussions over Western Tigray zone, which has been a contested territory for decades, and where we, along with Amnesty International, have released a report documenting an ongoing campaign of ethnic cleansing against Tigrayan civilians there. So there are many contentious issues which could, as you say, take a very long time to resolve. But there are also immediate actions which the warring parties can commit to. And we would like to see that happen immediately. And in many ways, this should be happening regardless of how the talks unfold. And that's a commitment to stop directly targeting civilian populations. But on the federal government side, it is also critical that the government restores services. This is an obligation. This is not something which is a political maneuvering tool, something which can be instrumentalized. Services, basic services need to be restored, and humanitarian access. There is currently absolutely no humanitarian access into Tigray. It's been completely cut off for the last 2 months. That also needs to start flowing in again.
There weren't there those corridors opened a few months ago where there was some aid that went in, even though it was limited. What was the success of that? And I wonder what was seen, observed by the people going in to help deliver this aid.
Yeah, so during a 5 months humanitarian truce which had been declared by the federal government, there were some food aid and other types of assistance which was going in. But one of the key problems which humanitarian actors continued to underscore was that not enough fuel was going in, not enough cash was going in. And as you can imagine, what this meant was that without fuel, they were not able to distribute a lot of the assistance outside the regional capital, Mekele, and outside the larger urban areas. And as we know, a lot of the communities who have been most affected by the horrific abuses since the beginning of the conflict are in in rural areas, and they were not receiving assistance. And at the same time, this also meant that humanitarian organizations were having to make very difficult decisions on how to prioritize. And for example, it has been very hard for them to get an in-depth sense of the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis, because again, without fuel, how do you go out and collect the sort of information which is necessary? We also know that there was a shortage of medical supplies, and this obviously is affecting the ability of the health sector right now to be able to treat individuals who are being injured in the artillery shelling in the last few weeks as well. We know of hospitals which have had to shut down, who've been unable to treat people who are facing the war injuries in the last few weeks.
Can the talks between the federal government and the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front be credible as far as a peace deal is concerned if in that deal there isn't a clause that stipulates how justice will be sought for the people we're hearing who have been murdered, maimed, raped by the thousands in Tigray?
I mean, this is a critical question, and one which we hope the African Union-led mediation efforts, and of course the role that South Africa and the United States, who are also expected to be part of the talks in the next few days, need to underscore. The level of impunity, we have documented ourselves how lack of accountability in the first phases of the conflict had resulted directly in new violence, new abuses against civilians. Accountability is absolutely critical for dealing with the harm which has happened in the last 2 years.
But who then should lead that process if both sides are accusing each other of atrocities?
Well, we have pushed for there to be a United Nations investigation. There is a mechanism which was established last December. Initially, there was some sign of support from the African group at the Human Rights Council. Unfortunately, just a month ago, the mandate was renewed of this commission, but we didn't at all see the sort of support from the African group. So this is absolutely critical that member states on the continent are supporting efforts which are underway. There was also an African Commission on Human and People's Rights investigation which was established, the findings of which have never been made public. So there are initiatives which can help lay the groundwork, and it is critical that their work is supported, that they are able to do their work, and that their findings are taken into account in future accountability proceedings.
Laetitia, good to have your time. Thank you very much for speaking to us on Daytime Update.